Brendan O'Connor, who's the Shadow Minister for Industry and Employment. Brendan, lovely to speak to you. The federal government is blaming lockdown restrictions in Victoria for the rise in the national unemployment rate. Is that how you read the figures?
I think that the lockdown in Victoria has a bearing on the unemployment rate, of course, because businesses have been, due to health reasons, asked to close down or restrict business, and to do otherwise would be to sort of head down the fatal path of Donald Trump's America or Boris Johnson's United Kingdom. The Victorian government's doing exactly the right thing based on science. And frankly, I'm appalled at federal ministers attacking the health experts' advice and what we have to do in Victoria in order to ensure that we see this second wave end and we can open up to the rest of the country.
As you mentioned, the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, and others, of course, too, the Health Minister, have urged the Victorian Premier, Daniel Andrews, to ease more restrictions this weekend. There is going to be an announcement on Sunday. We already know that, but more easing to open up business. Given the World Health Organisation is now saying, if you heard this morning in a pretty good interview with my colleague Fran Kelly, that essentially lockdowns aren't sustainable. They can't be the model. Shouldn't the Victorian government, with the numbers that we have, be looking to pivot and open up the economy, given also the job situation?
I don't think when the WHO was talking about lockdowns, they were looking at Victoria. I can assure you they were looking at...
They're talking about the sustainability of lockdowns.
Let me just answer the question, though. They were looking at the horrific escalation in Europe, where, frankly, there's been a loss of control by governments and chaos. Every day, every night on our television, we see the calamity and chaos of the United Kingdom, parts of Europe, North America, unfortunately other parts, South America, India. We're not in that state, and neither is Victoria. And frankly, I think Victoria will be held up as an exemplar, as one of the very few places in the world that will suppress a second wave and may well be used, Patricia, as a template, at least to be adapted to other jurisdictions. We are very close. And the fact that we have a Prime Minister and his ministers attacking a state government who are so close to suppressing this second wave is irresponsible, reckless and ignorant. And I really wish they would be working with the Victorian government. Insofar as the unemployment is concerned, as I just heard David Spears say, employment growth has been highest in Queensland, although you wouldn't know that listening to the Prime Minister or the Treasurer. And the unemployment rate in Victoria is lower than any state on the eastern seaboard. So there are, there's sort of lies, damn lies and statistics, depending on what you want to say about a given state.
Well, 37,000 jobs lost.
Yeah. And still the lowest unemployment rate, other than Western Australia, in the country.
Right, that's based on where we started from, but clearly this pandemic is disproportionately affecting Victoria.
That's right, but I look, people have different views, but I've watched what Donald Trump has done to the United States and what Boris Johnson is doing in failing to respond properly to a pandemic, and I'm glad. However, I, like you, have been under very significant restrictions, so have millions of Victorians. It's been very frustrating. I'm now in self-isolation, as you know, in Canberra. But frankly, it's a very difficult challenge, but we are so close. And to see federal counterparts sort of come in and start attacking the government just when we're so close is disheartening and disappointing.
Do you think
opening up... I think really it'd be better if they worked with the Victorian government.
Do you think opening up Victoria at this stage will really see those sorts of disastrous outcomes that you just described overseas?
Well, look at the one person who went from Chadstone, Kilmore, Shepparton, Benalla. And now we've got just one person. I think that we do have to deal with breakouts, and I do think we have to open up, and I do think it has to be based on evidence, science, and I think that's exactly the way in which the Victorian government is responding to it. I expect to see some easing of restrictions on Sunday, as has been promised, and I expect further restrictions eased as we get our life together. But I do agree, our life back, but I do agree you have to deal with the health front. This is an unprecedented, contagious pandemic. Deal with that first and then deal with the economy, of course. But I just look at Europe. They're going to close down again. Their health systems are going to be overrun again. And they haven't even hit winter, and they're not even through the peaks of a second wave. It's going to get worse and worse. And that to me is a reminder as to what could happen if Victorian had he opened up too early, Patricia. That's my strong
But you
view.
mentioned we're both Melburnians, and we are. That means that we're both pretty connected in our communities, you'd hope.
Yeah.
You know what kind of menacing role this lockdown is having on people. That's the sentiment that clearly the government federally is trying to pick up on. These increased calls to beyond blue. The mental health consequences too are quite significant, not just the job losses but the sense of isolation. Surely that is an important factor in all of this.
It is an important factor, but in the end I think you have to look at what is ultimately the net benefit. I mean, I don't think it would be in anyone's mental well-being, if we were to open up too early and then lock down very hard, and then get the sense that it can never be, we can never succeed in ending this sort of second wave. And so it is a difficult decision, but I do accept that the evidence and the advice of the health experts who obviously focus on these things. I mean, Josh Frydenberg hasn't got a clue. He's no expert in this field, and yet every day he stands up and attacks the Victorian government, which is really disappointing given that he's from Victoria and must understand that we have to end the challenges on this front so we can open up our economy. And I think we're very close, Patricia. I mean, we're doing very well now, and I think so I hope, and I'm sure everyone else does, that we're going to do well. I just wish the government would get off the back of Victoria and Queensland. They choose to pick Labor states and never mention even comparable things that are happening in other states. That's not leadership, it's partisanship. And in a pandemic, it's irresponsible, frankly.
Let's just talk tax if we can. Will Labor scrap or scale back the $130 billion stage 3 tax cuts? Do you think that's a wise thing to promise the public?
It's a lot of money. It's an enormous amount of money. And it doesn't, if it were to proceed, it doesn't come in, as you know, for 4 years. So whilst the Prime Minister does say he's got a mandate, he doesn't have a mandate for what happens in the next parliamentary term, Patricia. And I think but Labor certainly has to work out its position. There are other areas we should look to invest. The Treasurer himself has said that the third stage of the tax cuts wouldn't give him the bang for the buck that he needs, to stimulate the economy. So we should assess it. We have to look at all of the priorities and see where we land. I mean, it's not a very progressive stage. It does help the high income earners, frankly, like myself and other politicians and other people. And to that extent, a very high proportion goes to the top 3% of income earners. And we have to evaluate, is that what we need, or do we need to spend more money in aged care, social housing and the like? Can we do both? Well, that's possible too. So we will have our answers to that very important question before the election, but the tax itself is not going to come in this parliamentary term.
Just back on the unemployment figures, it's clearly better than the market had expected. Does that give you some confidence that our economy is rebounding better than perhaps we thought it would?
Well, I hope so. Look, partly the reason why the unemployment rate's lower than the forecast is the participation rate fell, and as that falls, so too does the unemployment rate. But look, my main concern right now is whether, in fact, the JobMaker hiring credit policy that takes over from JobKeeper can do the job. The design of that is you have to have additional workers if you get any subsidy. The problem for the recovering businesses, not just in Victoria but across Australia, is they won't have recovered sufficiently to be able to add, above and beyond what their staff levels are once they lose JobKeeper. So the intersection of JobKeeper and the new policy is of great concern to me and Labor colleagues in terms of it working. And if it doesn't work, then unemployment will... You have to remember, Treasury has forecast employment over the last 7 years and has almost never got it right, and it's always been higher. Unemployment has always been higher when they've sought to forecast it. So I'm sceptical about the forecast, and I just do concern myself with the way in which the initiative is supposed to work, and I think there are design flaws with it, which we should examine. We will examine in a Senate committee before it's legislated. We'll be doing that very soon, just to see if we can improve the mechanisms that's proposed by the government.
Brendan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much, Patricia.
Brendan O'Connor, the Shadow Employment and Industry Minister, joining me there. Let's get the latest.